Welcome to the TNT Real Estate Podcast, where we spark conversations that set you up for real estate success. I'm Tyler.
And I'm Tanya, and each week we bring you expert tips on navigating Northern Ontario's real estate market. Whether you're buying, selling, or investing, we've got the tools to help you thrive. Today we're going to talk about 5 costly mistakes that real estate investors make. So Tyler, let me ask you first. Have you ever made a big mistake in real estate investing that you regret to this day?
Not even one. I'm perfect. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, absolutely. I would say the biggest mistake that I made, we bought a building a few years ago throughout COVID. And obviously, there was multiple offers. And I kind of just rested on my morals of being like, I know what I'm buying. And then that obviously transpired into, $25,000 of foundation work. Cause I didn't you could see like a little bit of water in the basement. I was like, no problem. We'll, patch it up, blah, blah, blah. And then, 3 years later we've patched it twice and it's still leaking. So I would say that was my biggest mistake. Obviously the one that everybody says that they should have bought more before COVID. I made that mistake too. I wish I would have owned 10 properties before COVID. But yeah, I would say, not doing the thorough due diligence. Yeah. But I mean, I guess it all did work out in the end, and we're still up. So I'm not
you're
that bummed
making
about
money
it,
on the property in the end, right?
But yeah, it would have been nice to save that money by doing it. Would I have not bought it though? I don't know. Maybe I would have bought it knowing those issues. I just would have planned differently.
I think, we're pretty lucky. I don't think we've seen a lot of real estate investment mistakes. Like COVID, we had this crazy run up where people were buying properties and buildings without inspections, not doing due diligence, kind of like, you mentioned. Yep. You got a little bit ahead of yourself there. But, when it came to reselling those properties, I don't think we've really seen too many issues. We've maybe seen a few where maybe people banked on the appreciation of the property a little bit too much, and then certainly they didn't get the appreciation, end up having to put money into the property.
Yeah, especially at the height of COVID. I mean, prices were soaring. And then, but I mean, at this point right now that we are in the market, we're basically at the peak of COVID prices. So if you bought even at the peak, you're still going to, make your money back. Yeah. So, depending on how much money you put into, capital expenditures and maintenance, obviously will dictate, how much money you're going to make on the back end. But I think most people that invested throughout COVID, especially with, myself or you, I think are doing great in their investments.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's pretty much mistake number 1 is lack of thorough research and due diligence. So we'll touch a little bit more on this topic. Have you ever had a client or maybe heard of somebody else, if maybe it hasn't been in your practice, that they've loved the property on paper, everything looked really great, the numbers looked good, but the neighborhood became an issue?
Of course. And we all know what neighborhood that is in Sudbury. Lots of people are scared of, Flower Mill, Donovan. But I mean, when you're looking at cash flowing properties, that's kind of where you're going. At the same time though, there was a stat that they released, I think 2 years ago, saying 80% of landlord tenant borne issues are from that neighborhood, right? So it's a risk, but also if you're willing to take the risk, you're going to get some reward as well.
Yeah. I think we've had a couple of clients that unfortunately they bought a property where the tenant had just been placed by the previous landlord. Yep. And in that case, the rental amount looked good. The numbers looked good. The building was great. It was a great building. But the tenant that previous landlord put in just before they sold ended up being a huge issue. Okay. So I think that can be probably one of the biggest problems with real estate investment is the tenant placement and not doing your due diligence on the tenant as well that's moving in. They're paying a great rent, the other landlord put them in. Landlord looks like, they would do their own due diligence, but maybe that landlord did not.
Yeah. So is that a red flag to you when there's so let's say a fourplex, every tenant is brand new?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would want to know a bit more about those tenants. And we do get tenant acknowledgement forms signed, but you haven't vetted that tenant. You haven't, met them in person. You don't know how they keep their house and how they're going to be and how they're going to act. So I think it would be really tough if you bought a place where all the tenants are brand new. Maybe the rents look great, but I think that could be definitely an issue for the future.
So let's switch gears a little bit. What sort of other due diligence issues do you think we should be, telling our buyers to look for? Maybe even more than kind of tenant issues and stuff like that. But what other kind of due diligence can somebody do on a property?
Yeah. So we often rely on the income and expenses that are provided by the listing agent and by the landlord initially, but you can't just rely on those numbers themselves, right? It's very important that you put in your agreement of purchase and sale the ability to actually look over those bills. Yeah. What have the bills been for the last 12 months? Are there any unforeseen expenses? And maybe thinking about what expenses might not be on this income and expense sheet that might have been overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always funny to me when you're looking at, the MLS listing, it says insurance 2,000-ish.
$1,200 for water,
approximately $3,000. Well, go get your bill and tell me what the real amount is, because who knows. But I mean, and then there's also ways to kind of fact check that. You can call GSU and you can get an estimated, or actually you can get a solid monthly expense from GSU itself. You can go on the City of Greater Sudbury website and check the taxes. There are ways to definitely fact check those, and obviously getting 12 or 24 months of bills would be obviously a great way to make sure that.
And I think if the agent says that the client doesn't have the bills or doesn't know, they file their taxes every year, don't they? I know when I file my taxes, we have to account for every income and expense in the building, and we provide that to our accountant. So the landlord definitely knows what the income and expenses are. So I would definitely want to get those numbers for sure.
Yeah. And if they don't, it's a definite red flag.
Yeah.
So moving into obviously mistake number 2, we kind of already started talking about it, but underestimating total expenses. So when you're looking at an income and expense statement and you see insurance, hydro, water, taxes, what else is there? Is that it? And if that's not it, what else are people, if it's cash flowing at that amount, what other expenses should you be adding into your calculation?
Other people are not taking, sometimes you don't even see snow removal on there, right? And snow removal, we know, is getting more and more expensive. If you've got a large driveway. Snow removal, property management, are you going to manage the property on your own? Or are you going to hire a property manager? Garbage removal is another thing. And then you also have to take into account the cost of tenant turnover. Yeah. So every time a tenant turns over, good if you can bring the income up a little bit, but at the same time, you're going to have an expense cleaning the unit, getting rid of stuff. Like, you always have to consider the garbage left behind by the previous tenant. Yeah,
that's a very good point. And I was thinking, when you said that, I was thinking even like advertisement, if you're putting $100 on an ad on Kijiji or whatever it is. But yeah, cleaning out that unit, getting the cleaners in there, maybe painting a little bit, fixing up all the issues that they may have left behind. But even on top of that, repairs and maintenance, you should always be doing at least 5% for repairs, because there are, a toilet is going to break. There's going to be a door that needs to get put back on the hinges, whatever it is. There's always going to be repairs. And even if there's not repairs in your first year, it's just adding to your war chest for year, 4 or 5, when there's a bigger expense, a furnace goes or something. Like, it's adding to the war chest. And you should always keep that into the account.
Yeah. That kind of brings us into mistake number 3 a little bit as well. Our third mistake is over-leveraging financial resources. So we've got a couple questions here. Would you rather have a low mortgage property with slow appreciation? Okay. Or would you have a high mortgage property in a booming market? So assuming that appreciation is going to soar.
Assuming that appreciation is going to soar?
Yeah. I feel like you've kind of done both.
Yeah.
You've done a little bit of both.
I have, a high leverage property. Actually, I don't really have many anymore, because it's kind of, COVID has kind of helped that. They're all pretty, standard, but that's a tough one. I feel like I'm still in my risk, years. So I'm fine with like a higher leverage property, as long as it's not too crazy, to be able to get that high appreciation as well.
Yeah. I think appreciation can be so tricky because it's not something that's ever really guaranteed. But if you know that the neighborhood is kind of up and coming and that rents are rising, or that people are really wanting to move to that neighborhood, certainly if you look at something like the South End, if you can get a good income property in the South End, you're going to be paying a lot higher price for that property.
Absolutely.
But you can probably bank on the appreciation a little bit more. Yeah. I don't know. I kind of like a little bit of a mix of both, right? A little bit of that sort of up and coming, get a lower price property, have nice solid tenants, slow appreciation.
Yeah.
And if you can,
it is a nice,
maybe you bet a little bit on that booming neighborhood where it's higher priced, but you kind of hedge your bets by having both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting question for sure. I'm not sure. I think I'm fine with the risk and the way I am, but obviously some of my, older clients and stuff, I would, hedge a little bit safer, right?
Okay, so moving on to mistake number 4, we kind of talked about this a little bit. Mistake number 4 is neglecting effective property management.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we already talked a little bit about tenant selection and screening tenants. What do you think is one of the biggest red flags on, let's say, a tenant application form?
Missing information. If they're not willing to give you all of the information that you're asking for, obviously it's a red flag. Other things are, a short, possibly like a short,
like a short tenancy, like they just moved in?
Yeah, either just moved into their apartment that they're in, that they're moving out of. Short, job term could be another red flag. There is all sorts. But obviously, you are a property manager. You use, is it single key that you use?
Yeah, we use single key for tenant screening.
So obviously, that's like a huge help to, run credit checks and all the reports. So, there are definitely, technologies that you can use to make it a safer kind of investment in the tenant. But yeah, those are some huge ones.
One of the tips that I learned from another realtor was if you can do this, if you get a tenant application and they put their previous or their current address on there, just do a little drive-by, just see how the yard's kept, just see is there trash everywhere? Is it looking pretty decent? Just do a little drive-by to make sure to see how they keep their current place.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure.
I think a lot of people don't want to get into property management, and that can be sort of an issue where you neglect maybe your tenants by not having that effective management.
Yeah. So would you recommend, obviously, let's say for the new investor, would you recommend getting a property manager property number 1?
Okay, so it depends on the size of the property and your tolerance for those calls.
Yep.
A guarantee you're going to get a plumbing issue when you've booked a vacation and you're away, or it's 2:00 in the morning. Someone
Why do toilets break at 2 a.m.?
No, they always seem to break in the middle of the night or on a Sunday.
Yeah,
where you're paying double the plumbing rates.
Yeah, it's never a weekday at 1:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah, so if you do get a property manager, they will definitely be worth their time and money in just mitigating those things so you can live a little bit more peaceful life. But if you are in the area and you want to be hands-on, maybe it's another property you bought and it's just a couple blocks away, great. And if you feel up to it, do it. Maybe have a contingency plan though if you go on holiday.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of, that would be my hot take on this, would be, the first 1 or 2 properties self-manage, but obviously have a backup plan, have maybe, build a relationship with a property manager that doesn't mind you calling and asking advice. But it's a great learning experience, especially for, property number 1 or 2, self-manage, learn about tenant issues, learn about tenant relationships, learn about how to fix a toilet yourself. And so, exactly, how much it's going to cost you in time and money. But obviously when you get to, property 3 or 4, it's time to hire a professional property manager.
Yeah.
But I think, when you're purchasing, and I learned this from, I forget the gentleman's name, but he's a huge investor, and he always said, even if you're buying property number 1 and you're going to self-manage, when you're running your numbers, put property management expenses in there, which is 8 to 10% typically. Add it in, because when you do get to that stage in your career and you keep that property, it's already going to be, you're going to have that banked and ready to invest.
That's a really great point, because a lot of our clients do want to acquire more and more properties. So you have to build that into your expenses ahead of time, just to make sure you're taking into account.
Absolutely. So mistake number 5, lacking a clear exit strategy. So when you're purchasing a property or you're guiding your buyers, do you talk to them about how long are you going to stay in this? What's going to happen in 2, 3, 5 years, 10 years?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like any investment, right? If you go into, you're getting stocks or you're getting like mutual funds, that type of thing, they always ask you, what is your investment time period? When are you going to need this money? Is it for retirement or is it for, house renovation in 2 years? In this case, do you want to keep this property for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Is it a legacy property?
Yeah.
What is your intention with it? So I think that's really clear from the get-go. Talk to your realtor. What is your buy and hold, projection? What do you want to keep this property for? Maybe you only want to keep it for 5 years and then you want to move on to something bigger, right?
Yeah.
So we'll do buy and hold projections, like I'm sure as you do for your clients as well, right?
For sure.
But you always have to ask them and know what is their intent to keep it.
And if their plan is to hold it for 10 years until retirement, what happens when something happens in 5 years or the market soars? Is it time to get out now? Like you have to have these conversations. If they think they want to hold it for 25 years, that actually means 10 years in most cases. So it's just, you need to have that conversation with your clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good for us to check in with our clients every, 3, 5, 7 years as well and kind of see where they're at in their journey.
Absolutely.
Just to make sure that we're giving them the proper advice and talking about the exit strategy as well. I think it's very important for our investors to consider, like, how am I going to then divest of this property? What is my intention in 5 years or 7 years? And make sure that you don't necessarily get locked into maybe a mortgage, that you have a costly mortgage buyout if you're in a fixed rate and a fixed term. I think that's very important for investors to consider, always consider what is your exit strategy.
Absolutely. It's very important. Okay, so closing thoughts. Let's get one last question. If you had a piece of advice for a first-time real estate investor, what would it be?
I think the most important thing is, well, actually, there's so many things. It's hard to just name one thing. But I think the income and expense is the biggest thing, because that can really drive you over the edge, and to have that contingency plan for when things go wrong. Yeah. I think that's very important.
Okay. I would say my piece of advice for a new investor would be to, do the research and go on YouTube and watch 14 hours of, content, because information is everywhere. But then there's going to come a point where you have analysis paralysis and you're like, what if another better property comes up tomorrow? There comes, you need to have your standards set when you're buying a property. And when the property hits those standards, you pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. You can't always say, there's going to be another property coming. There's going to be another property coming, because the best time to invest in real estate was yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
So pull the trigger, buy your first one, and keep going from there.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Awesome. And a great place to leave off.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in to the TNT podcast. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to leave us a comment, subscribe, and share with a friend who might be interested in real estate.
We'll catch you next time, and until then, stay ahead in real estate.